Welcome to Book Banter with me, your host, Dianne Burkhart. I hope you will join me every Wednesday as we explore all things to do with, well, books. Let's get on with our show today. Hello, my happy people. Thank you so much for joining me today, July 6th, 2022. You are going to be so happy you are here. Recently, I got a chance to sit down with a good friend of mine, DJ Jamison, who happens to be a very successful romance indie author. We got to talking so much about books and different genre and how to write and how to produce. And we kind of went a little long, so I'm going to break this interview up into this week's episode and next week's episode. So don't forget to check back, because in next week's episode, you actually get to hear her read a part of one of her books that happens to be for free right now. And you can find all of that information in the description of this podcast. So I'm going to forgo my usual blathering and just get straight to the interview. Please welcome DJ Jamison. Most people, of course, will not know how we know each other. So why don't you explain that?
Well, we went to the same college in Wichita. I believe you were the advertising manager.
Right. I was the advertising manager for the Sunflower, the campus newspaper. But now what were you doing for the school newspaper?
Well, I was a copy editor. I was a staff writer. I was a news editor. I was the editor-in-chief for a semester. So I kind of did everything that you could do. But I was always more focused on production for the most part. And that's what I did after I graduated. I was a copy editor for about 10 years in newspaper.
So now how do you transition from doing all this editing work to being such a prolific romance author?
Well, I always was a writer too. I think the thing about it was that I didn't want to be a reporter because I'm an introvert and I don't really like approaching people, especially just like out on the street or whatever. So I kind of went the editing path because that was easier for me. Mm-hmm. But as a fiction writer, I can write the stories I want. I don't have to approach people every day and do interviews. And, I did some of that while I was in newspaper here and there, like for feature stories. And it was something that I had always wanted to do. Like I had always wanted to write books. Like from the time I was 15 years old, I had wanted to write fiction. I've always been like a huge book reader. I was sort of discouraged when I was young by, this is going to be a very hard career for you to succeed in.
Yeah.
It's very rare for people to be successful. And so journalism was like an easy path because it's a very concrete kind of profession. Like you get a degree, you get a job, you have security. So I kind of fell into that in high school and college.
Yeah, that was the same reason for me too. I had heard those same things. It's too hard. Don't even try it. So I went the journalism route because I could still write.
Right. You can still use a lot of the same skills. So all of that stuff really came in handy as an indie author because not only did I know how to write, but I knew how to kind of self-edit. I knew how to design things because I used to design newspaper pages as well. Yeah. So I had an eye for design. So for my very, very, very first stories, I could do my own covers, even if they weren't fabulous, they weren't hideous, right?
Yeah.
I could just do a lot more of the stuff. I could make promotional materials and I could do some of the marketing and I could figure all those things out. But basically, I worked in newspaper for 10 years until I started to have kids. I really didn't like the last newspaper I was at. It was a pretty toxic workplace. I got an inheritance from my grandmother, so I was finally able to quit and be like, what do I really want to do? Mm-hmm. And I tried and failed to write sort of like a YA fantasy book for like a year or something. And I thought, I can't do this. I just can't. I didn't really know how to put a plot together, and it was a very big kind of epic, and I just was struggling with it, and it was never coming together. And I went on to have a couple other jobs that were more marketing oriented. What happened was I started reading a lot of romance. There was a book app called Oyster where it was unlimited reading.
I haven't heard of that.
It's now out of business, but it's similar to Kindle Unlimited on Amazon. You could read whatever you wanted for like $10 a month. But there was a lot more romance available than other genres.
That seems to be the thing. That's like the popular one that people want to read and write.
Right. Books with big mainstream publishers won't always participate in these kind of subscription services. So your options are sort of more limited. I kind of started reading romance really for the first time in my life, unless you count some of the stuff I read when I was 12, like V.C. Andrews, which is kind of a weird, twisted kind of romance.
Yeah.
So first I read more of the standard male-female romance, historical romances. I got burnt out on that stuff, though, after a while. I just wasn't finding it very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I had also gotten into reading LGBT fiction, like more like YA stuff. And I had done some book reviews. So I was on NetGalley and things. And so I was getting LGBT fiction books that were more like the literary books. And then I sort of just segged into romance at some point. I was reading LGBT, and then I found a LGBT romance, and then I started reading those. So basically what happened was I was reading some of these romances, and I started noticing how many of them were self-published.
Oh, yeah.
And part of the obstacle to me for being an author was always this feeling of, I have to write the perfect book. I have to go through all these steps to possibly just be rejected over and over again by it. And how do you get an agent? And the whole process felt very like mystical and overwhelming. And so when I saw that a lot of these romance books were self-published, and some of them were not even big, long books, but like little novellas, shorter stories that were easier to write,
mm-hmm.
I was kind of like, I think I could try this. You know, I could just try. And I had read about Smashwords. I don't know if you've heard of Smashwords.
I've heard of it, but I haven't checked into it. So why don't you explain what it is?
Smashwords is a self-publishing platform, and I found a lot of resources on it about like how to self-publish. And you can publish your book right through their website, and they will distribute it everywhere but Amazon. They won't distribute it to Amazon. Mm-hmm. You have to upload separately for Amazon. It kind of gave me the courage to just write my first story. It was short. It was like a novella that was like less than 20,000 words. And I just put it up free because I was like, let me see mm-hmm. what happens. Will anyone even read this? Like, I didn't really expect anyone to even read it. And then they did because it was free. And I was like, wow, people are reading it. Maybe I'll just bump it up to 99 cents, you know, see what happens. Then it was the beginning of a little series of novellas. You know, I wrote the next one. At some point, I figured out to publish on Amazon first, to use Kindle Unlimited, mm-hmm. and that these things worked better. But basically, I spent the whole first year just figuring out how to write a story, how to publish a story, different places I could market that story. Like, I did not come into this as like a polished pro-level author. I came into this as like someone who's just dabbling and experimenting and trying to figure out, is this worth doing? Is this something I can do?
So now, what was the title of that first one?
It is no longer available. I actually just took that series down this year, but it was called Changing Focus, and it was about a newspaper because that's what I knew. And it was about
was it
like
the
editor
journal?
And a photographer.
Yeah, I remember. I think I have a copy of that.
Yeah. And I did learn a lot. Like, you know, I didn't know how to write romance when I started. I mean, it was kind of weird because on the one hand, when I was trying to write other genres, I did always gravitate to some sort of romantic storyline that sometimes interfered with writing, like the epic fantasy novel, right? Yeah. So romance was definitely like the right place for me to be as far as writing went. But I didn't have experience with writing romance. I didn't understand all the tropes that people like and why readers like their characters written a certain way. And so those first few novellas, I learned a lot about you can't write characters that are jerks. If you have conflict, it has to be done a certain way. you can't make them annoyed or angry with your character. And that is actually very, very challenging, to write a whole character and a whole story and have conflicts and yet still have them like this character the whole time and not have them do anything or say anything, or, you know what I mean, that annoys people or frustrates people. So that first series, I learned a lot about kind of writing more likable characters and developing stories and things like that.
So do you have like a set formula for how you do some of these?
I do not. When I started writing, I was what you would call a pantser.
Oh, yeah.
And I would just write, kind of just follow the muse, and I would have ideas in my mind. I think I want to write a story where this guy falls for this patient in the ER, but he doesn't want to date him because he's a nurse, and that's, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Like, I would have sort of the concept and the motives and the challenges that I wanted the characters to have. But then all the like individual scenes would just kind of be whatever came to me, whatever inspired me. So I did that for a long time, probably a couple of years. I wrote just off the cuff, stream of consciousness type writing. And then I'll say 2 to 2.5 years ago, I started being more of what we call a plantser.
Oh, yeah.
So like plan more, and I have more of a specific premise. I have done outlines like 3 or 4 times. I've had different levels of success with that. Like sometimes I can write a book to an outline, sometimes I can't, and I end up deviating hugely from the outline. But I do plan more. I have more of a specific goal to the story. Like I did a series called Thrust into Love, which was about a hookup app, except it would be like a hookup app that went awry. It would be like you show up for your hookup and it's the worst person possible. Like it's the most
that sounds like real dating
person. So like the very first book was called Swiped by My Dad's Best Friends. He shows up and it's his dad's best friend. Helpfully, he had always had a crush on him and they hadn't seen each other in years. But they're both like, oh my God. And then I did one that was Matched by My Rival, where they show up for the hookup and it's the guy that they hate. It's like their enemy. And then I did one where it was like roommates who accidentally meet up for a hookup. So like I had a more concrete premise, and I planned more before I wrote the story. So I'm kind of in that place now where I do more planning. I still don't always outline every chapter or anything like that, but I have a lot of specific things I know need to happen. So I don't have a formula. I'm actually a very chaotic writer. I wish I had a formula.
I agree. It's like I've tried so many times to plot out things, and every time that I do, the voices in my head just go, that's cute. We're not doing that.
Well, I believe it's a different brain process, right? Like when you make an outline, you're using like the analytical side of your brain, right? And you're saying, oh, this should happen and that should happen and this should happen. Yeah. But when you're writing, you're using this more creative subconscious level of your brain. I always joke that my subconscious is smarter than my conscious thoughts. So like whenever I plan, usually is not the best way to do the story. And then as I write, I start realizing that doesn't feel right. That doesn't work. This is going to feel too forced or whatever. And like the characters just kind of come alive as you write. And occasionally the story takes turns you don't expect. I think if you go in with a plan, it helps because you know where you want to go. You know kind of your character's strengths and weaknesses, fears, goals, and those sort of things. That's going to give you a clearer path. But I've never been someone who can just like plan out everything in detail because it would just take all the creativity out of the process.
You know, and the one thing that I was thinking about was it sounds like you did like a very natural progression going from what you enjoyed reading and moving into the male romance and then transitioning into writing that.
Right.
But as a married heterosexual woman, do you ever get any people questioning your ability to write a good male romance?
Well, there's a couple of things to understand about that. The first thing is that the audience for these books are largely also women because romance is a genre that was basically built by and for women. Women, by and large, are the biggest percentage of people who read romances, and it doesn't really matter whether it's straight romance or queer romance. So I don't get a lot of pushback in terms of, can you write a good romance? Are there a few people in the queer community who will bring it up and say, all these women are writing romance and they don't really know what it's like to be a gay man? Yeah, there are some. But every person that I've met in real life, for example, I just went to the Pride event in my hometown. I had a drag queen buy like 6 books for me. She was just thrilled that there was someone there who had written queer romance.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the reason I did Pride was a lot of people in the queer community don't even know it exists. They don't even know it's there because bookstores typically don't carry queer romance in general. And so I like to be there just so they know there are stories out there that have queer characters that are happy romance stories and not kind of this despairing, depressing stories about the gay struggle and things like that.
Yeah.
You know, I do have readers who are gay men who love my books and have no issue. They don't care who writes it. They're just happy that it's there. So there's kind of this divide where some queer people don't like the idea of straight creators.
Mm-hmm.
And then others are just happy that there's content for them and they don't really care who creates it. And I think the problem is romance is really a different genre from queer literature.
Mm-hmm.
Romances are not trying to be like, I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this. They're not supposed to be representative of what is the most literal experience for a gay man in life. It's supposed to be romantic. It's supposed to be happy.
It's not necessarily reality. It's the fantasy.
It's the fantasy. Exactly. And, you know, straight romance is the same. We know this. We've read romances and been like, this is not how real life goes, right?
Yeah.
This is not how your dates go. This is not how your night in bed with a man goes.
Yeah.
Like, it romanticizes everything. And romance is no different. It romanticizes things. And the question of why are straight women so interested in reading or writing male-male romance comes up a lot. I frequently see it on social media from readers who are new to the genre. Ultimately, what it comes down to is most of the readers of romance are formerly readers of straight romance. So they've kind of spent their whole life reading romance, and they've gotten tired of some of the themes. They've gotten tired of watching the man swoop in and rescue the woman. They've got tired of female characters who they felt were not intelligent enough or weren't strong enough or whatever the case might be. And for me, like when I read a book that has a woman in it, I automatically start trying to identify with her. I'm comparing her to me and what I would do in that situation. And that can sometimes make it harder to just have that feeling of like just enjoying the story without judging the characters. So male-male romance, when you're a woman reading a book with just 2 men in it, it kind of allows you to not put yourself into the story, not compare yourself to the characters as much. You're able to just enjoy the story that's playing out and not feel as frustrated by the character's choices or motivations or compare it to your own life as much. So I think for a lot of women, it's just kind of a way of like taking themselves out of the story and just being able to enjoy it. And most readers who come to male-male romance from straight romance, they don't go back. They stop reading straight romance forever.
See, and I can actually
much.
understand that because I know when I was a teenager, I read a couple of the little romances for, younger readers. But I got tired of it really quick because it always seemed like so many of the female characters were tokens. They weren't like full-fleshed characters.
And I want to appreciate the characters for who they are, and I want them to fall in love because of the qualities they each have and how they fulfill each other. I don't want it to be, I just swoon because he's so masculine and strong and amazing and he's gonna, rescue me from my life. I think, too, a lot of straight romances, I don't know, you see they're more formulaic. You see kind of the same themes over and over again, especially historical romance. It's always going to be some sort of rescue her from her life sort of scenario. Yeah. And so romance has kind of a larger variety of storylines. Especially if you're a new reader coming in and you haven't read any romance, then you've got this whole world of like different dynamics to explore. You don't have that gender bias in there. don't want to disparage traditional romance too much. I do think it's evolving too with time. A romance from 20 years ago is not going to be the same as like the romances that are being put out today. But I definitely do think, especially for straight women who they're married, they've fallen in love, they've done this whole thing, they've watched all the movies and the TV shows and the Hallmark shows, like they're bored with it. They want something else. They want more of an escape from their life. And romance is completely different from their life. For me as an author, though, part of the reason, too, that I like to write it is I really feel the more straight women read and like romance, the more accepting they're going to be of the LGBT community, the more that they're going to vote for LGBT interests, because they're reading these characters and they're seeing their perspectives through stories, and they're just kind of starting to relate to them as
a human
people. So even if they live in a place where they don't have anyone in their life who's queer, if they read these books and they identify and empathize with these characters, they're going to start to be more open-minded and more accepting than other people are. So I feel like it can only be a good thing to spread more queer stories, to create more allies in the world. So that's kind of where I come from.
That's a great goal for these.
It is. And that's what I always tell people is that, like, I'm writing about people first, really. I'm writing about their hopes, their dreams, their fears, how they want to fit into the world and find love just like everyone else. Like, the fact that they're gay may influence their life, but we're all people. We all have the same sort of hopes and dreams, We all want to find love. So, and, obviously my books are mostly set in the Midwest, so I'm not writing like the big club scene, which I have no experience with. I'm writing the love story of the guy who grew up in the Midwest and doesn't have a huge community of queer friends to fall back on,
Yeah.
He's just another person dealing with problems, And the thing is, to me, I am writing people first and sexuality second. I try to accurately represent different sexualities with respect, but at the same time, that is not their sole identity. That is not always even their biggest concern in the story. Maybe they have other problems. Maybe they have a conflict with their family. Maybe they have a conflict at work, So ultimately, romance is romance first. It focuses on more sexualities. And I think one of the reasons that people like to read it is because it's not as locked into like these narrow story types as straight romance is. You do get to learn about a lot of different sexualities. They do get to read a lot of books that are less formulaic. And there are a lot of queer writers in the genre too. And a lot of trans men write male-male romance. There's a few lesbians who write male-male romance. So when you see a woman's name, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a straight woman. It could be a straight woman. It could be a bi woman. It could be a non-binary person. It could be, a trans person. So really the genre is made up of everyone. And the readership, like I said, it's like probably 80% straight women, 20% other identities.
I was surprised whenever I found out that you were writing, male-male romance. But the thing that really shocked me was seeing you at conventions. Seeing you at a table, because I know what an introvert you are.
Yeah. Conventions are hard. I don't mind so much the part where I'm at a table because I sort of know I have a role to play. Mm-hmm. But I'm not very good at the whole, I take photos with people and smile. I've never been good on camera. But where I really struggle is sometimes there are like social parts of that conference, like events in the evening and people hanging out. And I don't know how to deal with that. So a lot of times I just don't even participate in the social parts of it. I'm usually extremely drained by the time it's over. The main one I've gone to is called GRL, which stands for Gay Romance Literature. Mm-hmm. It's very specific to our genre. It lasts like 4 days. And by the time I leave, I'm just dead. I have no energy. It usually takes me a while to recover from it. I don't go every year because it's very hard for me. I'm not good at approaching people I don't know, that kind of thing. So that's the part of it that's the hardest for me. Now, like doing Pride for one day, I'm at a table. It's not challenging for me because all I'm really doing is signing books for people, telling them what the books are about. I have kind of a very specific job to do there. Mm-hmm. And I don't have to break the ice and make small talk and that kind of thing.
And plus, you probably have like people coming through constantly, so you're not having to sit there and entertain one person. You get to just keep rotating through everyone.
Yeah, there's a little bit more of like people just coming through one after the other, and they don't all stay. There is occasionally a person who's just extra chatty, which is fine. I just struggle if the conversation is not, going smoothly.
Yeah.
then it can feel awkward at times.
Now, when did you start publishing? When was your first book out?
Late 2015.
Okay, and that was actually the same year that I put mine out. I'm not getting ready to publish my 7th book. How many books do you have out?
I always just say over 20. I had a lot of shorter novellas at first, mm-hmm. and then I've also done box sets, but I think if you count it up like individual books, I lose track. I know it's between 20 and 30.
I see, because I was scrolling through your Amazon author page, and I think there's like some 4 or 5 pages.
Well, I also have translations into other languages.
Yeah.
So that makes it look like even more books, because I have some books in German, some in French, and some in Italian.
So I think those still count as separate books because there's still work that goes into them.
I mean, I'm not the one having to put all the work into them. I just hand them off and take the money, but yeah. And I have audiobooks, but only like, I think 8 or 9 that I've put into audio. Audio is very expensive, so
yeah, that's one reason. It's like, I just have the one beta version audiobook out for my first one, and I was just testing out my equipment to see how it works and if I could do the voices and everything. And I was reading it at the end of podcasts, and I just pieced all the bits that I'd read at the end of the podcast into an audiobook. Just because I'm just trying to figure out how to produce them myself right now.
Oh, yeah. Well, and see, for example, in my genre, I couldn't do my own audios because they want to hear those in a man's voice.
Yeah.
So we hire narrators. They're mostly, they're not all, but most of them are queer men. Mm-hmm. So you get a little bit more the right kind of performance mm-hmm. and voice for the book. That's very, very expensive. I just did my last series. I did 3 books, and they all cost close to $3,000 each to produce. Wow. Yeah. That was kind of an experiment with a more high-level narrator.
Yeah.
But the problem is I can't make some money back. I don't think I'm going to make some money back because the first book sold really well. But even then, ACX, which is the Audible company, they're paying me such a small amount per sale. You have to sell a lot to make your money back. And it just seems to get worse all the time.
I can't load up audiobooks from Germany.
Oh, because you're not in America. Yeah. The thing about it is they put a retail price of $25 on an audio. But then if it's a member of Audible, someone who has a subscription, then they pay you one royalty. If it's someone who just buys your audio and doesn't have a subscription, they pay you a different royalty. Then if they have something called Whisper Sync, which is if they already own the ebook, they can get the audio at half price. So then you get an even lower royalty. There's basically like 4 different royalties you can get. And a lot of them are very low. You don't actually get 40% of the retail price, hardly ever. You get more like 40% of $7 or something. So at that point, you're spending $3,000 to make an audio. You're getting like $3 a sale or something. It takes a long time, to earn back $3,000.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So with my new series, I signed with an audio company called Tantor. Mm-hmm. So like they're just going to make the audios, and I just took the advance money, and I don't have to worry about losing money. So it's too hard to make a profit. On ACX.
And we're going to end today's episode right here. And don't forget, join us next week, July 13th, to hear the rest of the interview with romance author DJ Jamison. Thanks for joining us today. Now go forth and be happy.